Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Daphne Lazar-Price, and I am the Executive Director of JOFA. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome everybody this afternoon. I think nobody really knows what day or what time it is anymore, but it's my privilege and my pleasure to welcome everybody for this really timely conversation on self-care led by Nicole Nevarez. Who is the inaugural National Director of Time Mode Stand Up, which is an initiative to end gender harassment and abuse in Jewish communal workplaces. She's also a coach, a trainer, a facilitator, and a consultant on healthy organizational culture. She's also a very dear friend. And when we were musing about this, we thought, this would be like a valuable set of skills for everybody to kind of listen to and incorporate into their lives, especially as we kind of manage what self-care is. At the very start of the outbreak, Nicole and I actually co-authored an article for the JOFA blog about taking care of ourselves first. And I think that none of us really knew what we were getting into when this whole thing started. And when our kids ask us questions, we don't really have what to compare it to because we've never experienced anything like this in our own childhood. So this is, as I said, this is timely and important. And I want to thank Nicole for taking the time out of her schedule to lead this conversation. I'm going to hand it off to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Daphne. Thank you for allowing me to be here today, offering me the space to have what I believe is a critical conversation, perhaps the critical conversation around how we can best navigate and come to the other side of this experience, because there will be another side. I think what you just said about it being thoroughly unprecedented is an incredible challenge, additional challenge to the reality of what we're all experiencing. And part of what I'll talk today is how we can both allow ourselves the space to have the hard experience, but also see an opportunity here to develop even deeper skills about how we become our best selves and take care of our best selves. Definitely not talking about the motivational COVID thing where we're going to build a new skill and cook all our exciting recipes and all of that. If you're doing that, kol hakavod, good for you. That's amazing. But this is really about a micro practice. And by coming on today, by giving yourself the space and time, the hour to be with us, that in and of itself is an act of caring for yourself. That in and of itself is a statement that whatever else is going on in your life today, whether it's work, whether it's kids, whether it's just being with the feelings of how challenging this is, and perhaps being alone in your own space, that you took the time today to say, this is an important thing and I want to make a commitment to an hour of the conversation. And that in and of itself is an act of self-care. So we're going to talk about what it is and what it's not, because it's become a very trendy idea and it's become a buzzword that unfortunately then often dilutes the meaning and the practice of what that means. And there's become some associations with it that I'm going to posit to you are a bit inaccurate. Okay, just double checking my chat. All right, so we are going to also use the chat today. It's challenging on a webinar format sometimes to just have it be presentational when we're talking about something personal. And so we're going to invite you to use the chat, and there'll be a couple times I'll prompt you specifically. And then also if you have questions or comments along the way, Daphne and Danny from JOFA are here to manage the chat also. So my name's Nicole Nevarez, and Daphne basically gave you a little bit of rundown on me professionally. And I'll just say personally that I grew up with a language around spirituality and personal growth, and really dove into that process for myself in my early 20s. But as I've gotten older and life has presented me all kinds of new challenges, every moment along the way has given me opportunity and the challenge, because it is a choice to deepen my practice of how I take care of myself, to allow that to be a priority, to give myself permission that actually is a critical, a critical Jewish practice also. So you can see on your screen that I've offered you the word and a little piece of art I use all the time because I just think it's so stunning, um, of Hineni. So Hineni in our Jewish tradition and Jewish text is literally translated as I am here. And for me personally, and a lot of the professional work that I do, we talk about a much deeper meaning of that, which is that Hineni means to, like, I'm not just here, like physically here, but I'm showing up, that I'm here to bring my whole self. And in Jewish tradition, in the text of Torah, which is the primary text of our Jewish identity and life and tradition, it shows up at very critical times. So God calls to Abraham to be the first Jew and to lead the Jewish people. And Abraham answers with, Hineni, I'm here. And when Moses is called by the burning bush, as we just celebrated in the last week and a half, he and God calls Moses. Moses answers, Hineni. There's like an indication that something very important is going to happen. And so that is perhaps one of our most true and pure invitations from Jewish tradition, to say that showing up is also about being present, being open and willing to what's going to come in front of us, and that it really is the root of the practice of self-care. So we can't really there's a barrier to really engaging with taking care of ourselves and what that can look like when we're not able to show up for ourselves. And it's an incredibly challenging thing to do, not in a global pandemic, right? We're in a culture that says do, be, move all the time. We have constant technology, we have constant information. And it's a challenge. Like, it has to be an active choice to say, I'm going to be present for the moment. We'll talk about what that can mean in a minute. Now we have an extraordinary added layer of distraction, of many of us are feeling constant anxiety. Many of us are managing very different realities of lack of routine, confinement. We maybe don't have the access to some of the things we did or do that we consider taking care of ourselves. And that constant anxiety, that sort of pervasive unknown that we're living with right now, makes it even more challenging to show up. And to become Hineni, and to be willing to take steps to take on a real practice of taking care of ourselves in very, as I said earlier, micro, very fundamental ways. So I invite you for the next, whatever we have now, 50 minutes or so, to 52 minutes, to, put your 2 feet on the floor, just to start, and to feel underneath your feet. If you're in a place where you can put your feet on the floor. If you're not, if you're seated in a position where you can't do that, you can just feel the foundation of the chair or the bed or whatever you're sitting on. Like, literally pay attention to feeling it underneath your legs, your feet, wherever your focus is placed. And to know that by doing that alone, that's a practice of becoming Hineni and coming back to, like, where am I right in this moment? So one of the things I've learned from leading and being on a lot of webinars and FaceTimes and Zooms with friends over the last several weeks is that you can actually feel like an energetic exchange even through a screen. You can actually, like, feel the people. So I'm going to invite us together to do that, feet on the floor or feeling the surface beneath you, and just take one deep breath together, just one. We're not going to sit here and meditate, I promise. Awesome. All right. So I'm going to stop the share for a moment, because I expect that if, while I'm sharing, you can't see my face quite as close up. So I'm going to come into providing a little bit more access to that. So let's talk about what self-care is not. Self-care is not self-indulgence. It is not selfishness or over-focus on ourselves. It's actually thriving. It's a discipline. And often in our culture, it evokes this idea of, like, massages and manicures, maybe going to the gym or doing things that are very much focused on our external selves. And I want to offer that it's actually about internal care. It's actually about focusing within on the very basic needs of our body, our mind, and our spirit. That when we pause in that space of hineni and ask, what do I need to be my best self? Listen, I love a manicure. I love a massage. I do not love the gym. I love my yoga classes. But they're, if I'm not paying attention to the very most basics, and we'll talk about this at the end also of, am I eating food that doesn't compromise my body or my self-esteem? Am I drinking enough water? The manicure thing is like, the manicure itself is lovely, but the self-care practice for me is that I'm taking the space and time to do something for myself, to be in a more quiet, attended to space. And I can do that anywhere. It's more fun when I can get a manicure, but I can do it anywhere. So it's really I say all the time that the oldest, truest cliche, and maybe it's not a cliche, but I think that it has become one, is the oxygen mask, right? If we really think about what that means in an airplane, why are we asked to put on an oxygen mask first? Because we literally have the possibility of dying without it. And so if we die, if we are no longer, like physically on the airplane, we can't help the person next to us, right? It even says, I think sometimes in our, all of that safety stuff we often don't listen to, it says, before you even help your child, because if you don't have that mask on, if you're not actually able to like physically take care of another person, you've lost that capacity. So the question is, what do I need? And it doesn't have to be profound. It doesn't, I feel like I will never forget this mindfulness session that I was collaborating with my kids' school on. And I watched as particularly women in the room went from what we were teaching, which was about these moments of being present, to why they tried to take a yoga class, couldn't take the yoga class, and it became this whole stressful thing in their life about how they couldn't get to the yoga class, and then they felt bad about themselves. And this is what we do, right? Women are conditioned, and this, and we didn't, Daphne, talk for 1 second about my background also in working in gender education. So I'm not making this up. I have 2 feet to stand on this. But women are truly conditioned, girls and women, to serve and to sacrifice. That's true in our culture at large, and it's true in our Jewish tradition. We're taught to serve and to sacrifice. There's some really interesting sociologic evolution of this, which comes from the agricultural society, that when we moved into an agricultural society, your sustenance and your class as a family was based on how much property you owned and how much you could cultivate it. And in order to do that, you needed as many people as possible. And who made the people? You needed the women to make the people. And this paradigm emerged of, the men doing the work and the women being the people makers and keeping hearth and home a healthy and safe place, which I would argue is a critical, like, amazing spiritual act that we do for our families when that's our role. But somehow that also morphed into women being here to serve and to sacrifice. And that we see that often in our Jewish tradition also. When we add on to that, the advertising and beauty industry, which is like a whole other webinar, this gets amplified tremendously. And as women's roles evolved and we became more engaged in saying, wait a minute, there's an inequality here, as the women's movement began to take place, as women entered the workplace, we were told, you can now be anything, right? These barriers to professional development, you can be anything. And what girls and women often hear or heard is not you can be anything, but you should be everything. And when you combine all of those pieces, the gender conditioning, the way that we have treated men as superior, just in terms of what they bring into the world, and advertising, beauty, it makes it very hard for us to believe that we deserve and need to take care of ourselves in very fundamental ways. And so self-care, and I hear this all the time from women, people feel guilty, right? People feel guilty. Women feel guilty. Like, we all have our own stories and we're all on our own paths. But one unfortunate byproduct of this sort of self-help, self-care movement is that we're the first generation, wherever you were born, you're living in this generation right now, to have feelings about our feelings. So we tell ourselves, I feel sad, I feel anxious, I'm afraid. But wait, I shouldn't feel that, right? Then we have a feeling about our feeling. People have it worse, especially right now. I think for those of us who are struggling through our perhaps more privileged realities of being safe, not having sickness, not having loss, many of us are having those experiences too. We can sometimes get into this thing about like, I shouldn't have these feelings because somebody else has it worse. So part of self-care is just letting ourselves be where we are. Like, what if we took 5 minutes to be sad? Or what if every time we have that feeling, I have a beautiful friend and guide in my life who taught me to put my hand on my chest, and there's actually something kinesthetic that happens where you can feel sort of a weight and a grounding. And we just said, like, I am where I am. This sucks at the moment. I'm scared at the moment. And we don't have to fix and push it away, but we can just be with where we are. That in and of itself is an act of self-care. You know, your body is producing that feeling. So why fight it? If we allow them to happen, they move through. So, and it actually empowers us. So that goes back to becoming hineni, right? That if we can be present in the moment we're in and allow it, give ourselves permission, be kind to ourselves. Like, you know, I've learned sometimes when I have feelings about things that I shouldn't think I shouldn't have feelings around because they're so, you know, they're self-indulgent. You know, sometimes I'll just do the hand thing and be like, okay, honey, like call myself honey. It's a little weird. It took me a long time to do that. And just say, like, it's all right. You are where you are. But if in order to get to even having a self-care practice, for me, I've had to build that skill. So here's just an example. I hit a wall on Shabbat this week. I hit a wall. I felt for the first time sort of like what's going on in the world closing in on me more than I had. I'd been more sort of present in what was going on in my own life and in my family life. I don't remember. There was like a series of I had a friend share with me some very upsetting history about herself that I just felt an enormous amount of compassion for. And I don't know, there was some other series of events. And I just hit a wall and I crawled into bed for like 4 hours, I think. I slept a little. And I just like, that was it. Like, that was what I needed. And I think for those of us who struggle with the idea that self-care is self-indulgence, that would be a moment, right? Like, am I being lazy? I mean, it was Shabbat. So for me, it's a little like, that's a, you know, a space that I feel a little easier in, but I've been a long time napper since my kids were born. I just have felt this like intense physical need to nap in the afternoon. And I have struggled with guilt around that forever. Like, where does that come from? Right? Who says there are cultures all over the country that have siesta because they get that, like, you actually need a break. It's actually metabolic, by the way. And I realized when I was hitting a wall this Shabbat that I've been holding up a lot of other people, family members, my kids, and in my work, I do a lot of that. And a lot of my friends look to me for that kind of support. And I just needed a break. I just needed a break from all of that. And I got up the next morning and I made my coffee, and thank you, God, it was a little bit warmer and sunnier. And I just sat in the sun for a while and I felt better and I felt replenished and like I could give again. And sometimes what I need, PS, is a shower. Like, I have learned that the shower can be one of the most important acts of self-care. Like, I love, right now I've had webinar days that I'm leading once or twice a week. And I love those days because they make me like do my hair and put on makeup. And I personally like to do that. Not everybody likes to do that, and that's perfectly fine. But also just knowing like I'm clean really, really helps me. Those are acts of self-care. So I want to share a little bit about Judaism's take on this. Judaism had this down long before the, the hashtag and the articles and the conversations about what this means, and, this idea of the external self-care that's turned into some sense of self-indulgence for some of us. Judaism teaches us that we are created b'tselem Elohim. We're literally created in the image of God. If we're created in the image of God, we must be taught to treat ourselves well. We must be taught, like, if we honor God, it must be inherent to our tradition that we're intended to love and take care of ourselves. Many of us are aware of the adage from our text, love your neighbor as yourself. How did we get so focused on loving your neighbor and forget that there's a presupposition in that text that we love ourselves? Like, there's extraordinary wisdom around this in our tradition. If I want to love my neighbor, if I want to show up for acts of gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness, I can't do that without starting with myself. I have no oxygen mask on. Shabbat, the very tenet of our weekly practice, is inherent to wellness. Our tradition said, in order to be our best selves, we have to rest. Even God rested. And what does rest mean for us? For me, this Shabbos, it meant that I laid in my bed for 4 hours, but sometimes it literally means I just stop and take a deep breath. Often that helps me. It's a moment of rest from whatever's going on in my brain, whatever's going on in my computer and my children and the people around me. Love you, Daphne. Physical, emotional, spiritual, mental health. Our tradition is very clear around this. It's not a question. We don't even have to question this being a tenet of our tradition. So I'm going back to my slides, and I want to share some text. This is from Maimonides, Rambam, one of our greatest teachers, our greatest commentators on Torah, and a guy who clearly knew where it was at long before our contemporary world. When one is overpowered by imagination, prolonged meditation, which I'm going to define as obsessive thinking, not actual meditation, because that's a helpful thing. Prolonged meditation and avoidance of social contact. Yes, I see the irony in that, but in this case, meaning like pulling yourself out of society and community, which he never exhibited before. Or when one avoids pleasant experiences, which were in him before, the physician, the doctor who might be addressing this person's ailments, should do nothing for the physical body before he improves the soul by removing the extreme emotions. It'd be nice to find a doctor who could remove the extreme emotions, but the understanding, the interpretation I have of this text from Rambam is that the mental, emotional, spiritual health of ourselves is not only completely related to our physical wellness, but actually is perhaps the first priority to pay attention to. My little one, my 10-year-old, bless her, is having a really hard time. There's a lot of factors, including that we're moving, which was already hard enough for her. And she suddenly has stomach aches every night, sometimes to the point where she is crying, tears down her face. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. And with some consultation weeks ago with her pediatrician and with my beautiful sister, who's a medical professional, we all agree that it's emotional. I don't need to treat her stomach ache. I need to treat her suffering and her pain and her struggle. And so the other day I worked with her to talk about her feelings, which is really hard for her. And she got present with her anger and her sadness, and her stomach ache completely went away. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't have very real physical ailments. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is they're inextricably linked, and our tradition says to us, you need to take care of your spiritual, emotional, mental health first. And that is what self-care is about. We also have a very well-known tefillah prayer, the Mishaberach prayer, our prayer for healing. It says that we are praying for refuah shlema, first of all, a complete recovery. To me, there's an indication there that a complete recovery just doesn't mean like we're totally recovered, but that all the parts of ourselves are recovering. And a refuat hanefesh u refuat haguf, a healing of the soul first, and then of the body. So again, like for me, the way that I see our tradition teaching here is that we should be connected to our best selves. that we are in need of spiritual, mental, emotional health before the body, and that for the body to show up for others, those things have to be in place also. The question becomes, what do I need? And sometimes that's vegging out for a while, and sometimes that's one deep breath, and sometimes it's making sure we're hydrated, by the way, very important at this moment in time. And that allows me to show up for others. It's not about being selfish or indulgent. Okay. So I just want to again remind you that the chat is there. I can't see all of your beautiful faces, which makes it like feel a little bit more participatory, and I'm talking a lot. So I just want to invite you again to know your voice matters in this conversation. I did get all of your questions ahead of time, and I think through what I'll say, it's going to address most of them. And I'll watch the time for some Q&A at the end. But I just want to also offer that your voice matters in the room, and feel free to either offer something or ask a question. Okay. So actually, I'm not going to stop sharing. I have another slide. So as we think about our Jewish tradition, and as we look to our Jewish tradition, for me, I have been extremely grateful, and it feels like a very big bracha, a very big blessing in my life, that I find total symbiosis between my Jewish identity and our Jewish calendar and rituals, and this practice of self-care, becoming hineni, and showing up for myself. So I find it in Shabbat, I find it in all of our holidays, but for right now, I wanted to focus on where we are in the Jewish calendar. So at the moment, we are in the process of counting the Omer. So I know some of you know this, but for those who may not, I'm just going to explain that our tradition tells us to count the Omer, the days between the beginning of Passover and the beginning of Shavuot. Shavuot is the holiday that commemorates and celebrates the receiving of the Torah. And our understanding is that many scholars have talked about the deep spiritual meaning of this time, and they refer to that as the Sfirot HaOmer. And they assign an attribute to each week of the Omer. And that is related to a Kabbalistic understanding. Kabbalah is the study of Jewish mysticism. It often uncovers and talks about sometimes a deeper spiritual meaning to our tradition and our texts. And this is a marking of time to prepare ourselves as the Jewish people for the freedom that we're going to experience once we become a full nation and we head into the promised land, which is where we are headed through Shavuot, receiving the Torah and becoming a nation. And we count these days over 7 weeks, mirroring the journey from Egypt, from our narrow places, which we talk about as Passover, to becoming a free people. We become more liberated through this time that we spend wandering in the desert. Each of the 7 weeks reflect on this attribute, and it gives us, if you practice sort of the attributes of the Omer focus, then it's sort of what you're focusing on for your own personal and spiritual reflection for that week. And this week is Gevurah, which means strength. Perhaps we can think of it as strength of character, and perhaps we can also think of it as endurance, the discipline of boundary making. And this is also how we practice self-care. But self-care is a practice. It's a muscle that we have to grow. So I do practice a lot of yoga, and it's been an extraordinary experience to me, and really kind of shocking how strong my body is from all these years. But it's not like I went into my second, third, 15th class and suddenly had so much strength that I could do planks for longer periods of time, or some of the poses that require a lot of balance. It's taken me years and years of practice, and it's the strengthening of a muscle. And it's the same thing with our self-care practice and our personal growth work. It's a muscle, and we just have to practice it. We just have to become hineni and show up just that little bit. I really mean it when I tell you, if you walk away from today and the one thing you take is, I'm going to try to take a deep breath. The next time I feel that rising, I'm just going to practice taking a deep breath. Imperfectly, I'm going to forget all the time. And yet I promise you that over days, weeks, months, suddenly it will become more inherent. Even your body will learn that that's a response that I take, and it's an act of self-care. Endurance seems really important to me right now. We are in a bit of a marathon. We don't know when it's going to end. And in order to build the strength of endurance, what are think for a moment, what are the things you're doing that are helping you move through this time? I wanted to ask you what a strength of yours is that you take pride in, and maybe a strength that you're practicing right now that's helping with the endurance of this time. So that's an actual question. And I'm going to ask you to share in the chat. You have to share with all panelists and attendees for me to see them. But the question again is, what is a strength of yours that you take pride in? What is a strength of yours that maybe is also helping you to get through this time? Daphne shares reading. That's so interesting because I have this whole thing going on, as she knows, about how I don't read enough, which just shows you how it's different for all of us. My beautiful friend Laura says, I get back up. I get back up. That's a strength of mine. I get knocked down, but I get back up. Y'all, I'm getting answers from my family. Come on. I love you, my family. Needlework and music, very important. Sleep, a strength that I'm making sure that I take care of myself in that way. Connecting with others. Delegating some of the main mundane chores to others in my house. Daphne, let me know how that's working for you, because I have no idea how to make, although my kids are emptying the dishwasher. That's as far as we got.
It's working amazing. My kids are making dinner. I just
I know.
To go deal with the laundry.
Have you not seen all my Facebook posts to you that say you can send them to me? I'll quarantine them here. They'll be safe. I make a good cup of coffee. I totally hear that. Walking regularly. I love this idea of getting back up, right? Because getting back up doesn't mean, like, inherently means I let myself get knocked down, right? That's what happened on Shabbat. I let myself get knocked down because I was like, I'm done. But then I get back up, right? Each day when I get up, besides saying Modani, the prayer in the morning that thanks God for restoring me, I verbalize aloud my thanks that I woke up and I get to experience a new day. And I predict that it's going to be a great day. And then whatever happens, happens. But that's where I start my space. That's from Mindy. Thank you so much. Strength that I take pride in, listening to my body when I feel tired and working on patience. Listening to my body when I feel tired. This is an act of self-care. So for those of you who feel like it's indulgent, I think that's a really helpful one to ponder. Have you ever thought that just listening to your body and getting the sleep that you need, if you can, that's an act of self-care in and of itself? I've been talking down the pain in my chest, and sometimes it even works. Didi, I apologize if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I want to offer you that hand thing. So if you're working on the chest discomfort, most of us feel our anxiety in our bellies, in our chests, and in our shoulders. Not everybody, but most of us. Also, women hold a ton of stuff in our hips, but that's also another webinar. I want to invite you, you're talking down to pain in your chest, try the hand thing. 2 hands pushing even can honestly shift the energy, and sort of like that, just that feeling of connection and sort of like, right, I'm right here, right now. It can be very grounding. Awesome. Anyone else? Okay, so hopefully we know what it's not. And we've learned a little bit about how Jewish tradition is like all self-care all the time. By the way, if you're interested after, I have all kinds of other texts and reference points that tell me that this is true, including that Judaism honors the individual with the understanding that that in order to have community, like we have this idea of minyan, that we need to meet in tens to say certain prayers, but that the individual has all of their own mitzvot, all of their own commandments, that it's not just about community. that Judaism honors the individual. And again, I want to offer that if we're created b'tselem Elohim, if we're created in the image of God, unquestionably, in my opinion, we are meant to care for ourselves. We are holy beings. And if we are a holy being, how can we possibly not be commanded? We have a whole set of mitzvot and like teachings in our tradition about shmirat haguf and hanefesh, that we are literally commanded to take care of our bodies and our souls. So if you came on our conversation today thinking self-indulgence is part of the deal, maybe I've helped a little bit to help you trust that Jewish tradition is really clear that we go for it. It's our job. Okay, and Daphne also just shared the article that we wrote a couple of weeks ago. All right, let's get current, and then we'll get time for some talking. The current thing is COVID. Life, in fact, our article was called Selfcare in the Age of Corona, right? We're living through history. We're living through a time. There will be a before and an after. So there's extreme uncertainty. And again, regardless of our circumstances, scientifically, our cortisol levels are raised. The energy in the air is anxiety. There's personal anxiety, and some of us are experiencing different than others. I have a colleague I work with who's just not experiencing it as much, but our cortisol levels are inherently raised. They sort of can't not be. And when your cortisol level is raised, that's like your chemical reaction to anxiety. So, you know, when you're feeling overstressed and you start dropping things more, or you're feeling like anxiety and overstressed and you can't think as clearly, right? I have an experience, and maybe it's genetic because it happens to my sister too, where like our nervous systems get on fire and like we literally can't handle loud noise or stimulus. So that's your cortisol level being up, and it's up all the time now. And then it actually impacts your immune system, and it can make us, you know, then some of us are sleeping less. So all of these things really impact our physical self. And so we want to go back again to debunking the myth that self-care is like indulgent in some way, because we're literally to some degree talking about our physical health and wellness. We don't need to make it another to-do, right? That story about the woman who was like, well, I tried to go to a yoga class and then I couldn't get there. And then then it just added this thing that I felt bad about. This is not a to-do, right? If you have a yoga practice, a meditation practice, a mindfulness practice, all of the things that society, you know, culture and trend have told us is part of this deal, awesome. If it works for you, awesome. And if what you need is to just take a shower every day, self-care. If you're willing to pay attention to drinking enough water, self-care, right? If you need to lay around and let's be honest, let's call out my beautiful friend and colleague, Daphne. She's watching a lot of Vampire Diaries. Let's be honest, right?
It's honest. It's honest and it's true.
And it's helping, right?
Some days.
Okay. I'm just saying when you need to zone out to it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So some practices around becoming hineni. What can we control? So here's my moment, and I'm in fear, and fear is a forward focused emotion, right? I actually like the acronym false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real, right? I'm afraid that I will get sick, but I am not sick right now. So I'm now in false evidence. I'm now in another forward thinking place. That doesn't mean some of us are not having experiences that are really painful right now. It doesn't diminish that at all. But it does mean that when we get into our head and thinking about these things that cause us fear, we have small practices to bring us back to the moment that actually can help us see what can we control. And some of the things I've talked about are things we can control. I wanted to ask you in the chat, anybody who wants to share something they feel like they are able to control right now in a time that feels very out of control. I'm good at waiting. Choosing to go for a walk, something I can control, how much I move my body. I am trying to control how much water I drink. Just knowing that when my cortisol level is heightened and all this anxiety is in the air, our bodies need more hydration. Anyone else, something you can control? Nourishing myself out and my family with food. I can control getting outside every day and how I feed myself. I have to walk outside every day. I have to feel air on my face. And it's easier for some than others, depending on where we live. That's the other thing to know. Like, self-care practices are different accessibilities when they become an external thing, but internally, we all have the capacity to do the same work that we're talking about. So when we feel that I can control making daily virtual hangouts with my friends, awesome. And again, we can control different things. I can control whether I make those hangouts. I have not been able to, just because of my life, kids, work, etc. That's okay. We all have different things that we can control and give. How I spend my time, almost nothing is on a timeline right now. So it is an interesting point, right? Some of us have more control over our time right now, because if we're working from home, we can say, no, I can't do that 2:00 meeting, and nobody knows because, we're not in the office. Okay, how we spend our time outside of Zoom, school, and work. I mandated yesterday that my family was leaving the neighborhood and going somewhere else outside, but it was like not optional, right? I could control that. I mean, I couldn't control my husband. I can control my kids leaving the house. We can't actually really control anyone else. Okay, so what if the Omer, the time that we're in, is an opportunity for like a little bit of a spiritual spring cleaning? What if it is inviting us to some inner transformation, even in the middle of this incredibly difficult time? And what if our response to this incredibly difficult time was to deepen our practices, to stand up and say, I am setting a boundary. Taking care of myself is super important. And I'm learning that now, because if I don't, I will be that much more susceptible to sort of collapsing into what's happening right now. And then we built a muscle that we brought out on the other side. It's not another to-do. It's a way to practice gevura, strength. And maybe it'll lead to beginning to practice or deepening practices that are external, like yoga, meditation, taking more time for yourself. But that's not the goal. There's no goal. It's just about these single steps. So a few basic things: hands on our heart, right? Literally physically putting 2 feet on the ground. I often, when a friend calls, or mostly it's friends, but family, having a really difficult time, especially if they're freaking out, where are your feet right now? Feel them on the ground. You are actually okay in this moment. That deep breath, science, cortisol levels, brings it down a little bit, impacts the parasympathetic nervous system, whatever that means. This is the amount of science I know, by the way. So the mindfulness practice that we hear, this trendy mindfulness practice thing. Okay, so it's becoming hineni. Here's some really easy ones. 5 senses. I'm starting to feel this thing rise in my body. What can I see in front of me? Okay, my sweater is blue. What do I smell? I happen to be wearing essential oil right now, and I can smell it, right? What do I hear? Nothing in my room. It's quiet, which is so nice. 5 senses. I can put my hands on the chair. I can feel the chair under my legs. I can feel my feet on the floor. We could do taste, right? Like if there is a taste in your mouth, or if you're eating something while you're becoming anxious. But 5 senses, simple, in the moment. I'm having, not easy. I didn't say easy necessarily to transition to that, but it is simple. Telling yourself, I'm okay. I am okay. You don't have to believe it. Just to practice, almost like a mantra, I'm okay. And for me, what is the next right thing? Because we get so overwhelmed by all the stuff that's going on in our heads and around us. What is the next right thing? So when I start to think about, I'm pretty anxious about my kids in school right now. My daughter's having a particular hard time not being in school. They're doing fine with their online learning, but like, she's in pain. She loves school. What can I do about that right now? I actually can't do anything about it. but I can check in on her around how it's going today. I can check in on her about whether she's FaceTimed a friend. That is a next right thing I can do with her. Sometimes I'm in the middle of something and I can't do anything about the thing I'm worried about. That is so helpful to me. You know, if I start to think about something, I start to spin on the anxiety. What am I doing right now? Well, if I'm cooking dinner or washing dishes or taking a walk, the next right thing is to keep taking the walk. And if the next right thing is to respond to whatever I'm feeling anxious about, that's fine too. Sometimes the best parts of ourselves are shaped when we're in periods of transition. Sometimes the best parts of ourselves are shaped when we're in periods that challenge us. I heard one of my great spiritual teachers. I listened a little. I was having a very hard morning, and I listened a little self-care, and he talked about the opportunities inside of really profoundly hard times that most people, when they're in their comfort zone and things are going great, don't stand up and go like, how can I improve myself right now? How can I, like, what do I need to feel better? Because you're feeling good. But in a time of challenge, adversity, pain, what if the best part of ourselves can be shaped by those moments? Give her strength. One tiny step can have huge results. So another thing that's a practice that I find really powerful is the gratitude practice. Also gotten a lot of lip service and become a little trendy, but it works. It actually shifts your neural pathways, right? The things I focus on shift my neural pathways. So gratitude, one, I apologize. I don't remember who it was who shared before waking up. I'm grateful I woke up today. I live with a spouse right now, and that can be challenging. And I got to a place recently where I was very challenged, and I sat down and just wrote a gratitude list about him, right? Yes, all these things make me crazy, but here are all the gratitudes, and it just shifts energy and shifts perspective, and it can be really helpful. So you feel the anxiety rising, or you're exhausted, which might mean you need sleep, self-care. So what's 2 things I'm grateful for at this very moment? Again, we're going to do some questions, but I really want to ask you to honor yourself for showing up here for an hour today. It is truly an act of self-care. It is truly an act of saying, and discipline, because I'm sure there are many other things people could have been doing, but it is an act to say, I matter. I need, because you didn't just show up and take the hour, you showed up for this topic, which means you inherently have some interest in taking better care or taking care of yourself. Let's not say better because that's a judgment. So I want to just close with 2 things. One is just to think about getting back to basics in this practice. Like I shared some of these, taking deep breaths, checking your water, what you can control with food. I just want to honor that some of us have challenges with food, and that it can be really, really challenging when you're home all the time and when you're feeling stress and anxiety. So the best of our ability, right? What can we choose with what we're eating that helps us feel physically well and not get into all the guilt that society has given us about food? Also another webinar. Getting air, physical space. So some of us have more privilege around this than others. I can walk outside easily. I can go in my yard by myself. I can go in my room and shut the door. Not all of us have that right now. So can you think about what are the places you can take some physical space? You sometimes hear about moms of little kids locking themselves in the bathroom for a minute. Where can you get some physical space that nourishes you? How can you move your body? How do you need to move your body? Some of us don't want to walk, don't need to walk, doesn't help us. For the first few weeks, my upper mid back, which I'm challenged by a lot when I'm sitting a lot, was just in so much pain. And I just like stretched all day long. And I just mean like bend down and touch my toes, which I can do because, yoga. But, right, like what do I need to do to move my body just a little bit? Those of us that are working on Zoom all day, if you do nothing else, It is an act of self-care to stand up multiple times a day, shake your body out. That could be all you need. Basics. How can I get back to basics so that I don't make this another to do? And then I just want to let you know that I hope you found this helpful, and that I'm available, first of all, just to talk further conversation. If you want me to send you some basic resources that you can find online, or little practices, if you feel like you need a list, you can always reach out to me at this email. And that I do also offer workshops and facilitation and coaching. And if you're interested in any of that to support you, if you wanted to put together a group of women, if you have an organization, I'm honored to support you in any way that I can. So before we take questions, I want to ask everybody to put in the chat what I call a one-word whip, which is tell me one word, in one word, where you at right now. Right now, no wrong answers. A feeling, it could be I'm tired, I'm hungry. It could be settled. Whatever your word is about where you are right at this moment. And I'm going to call them out for everybody so we can all be in the room together. One word whip. Peaceful. Stressed. Peaceful. Tired. Worried. Overwhelmed. Grateful. Comforted. Hopeful. Tired. And just wait for a couple more. I don't want anybody to be missed. And then if you have questions, you can start to put them in the chat, Daphne. Is that how we'll? Okay. Questions in the chat. Grateful. Also, thanks for letting me talk at you for an hour. As a facilitator, this is not what we do. We all talk together. Maybe we have no questions. Give it another minute.
Just one administrative note. If you're on Facebook Live, please comment on the post there with your questions too. If somebody following there.
So I have a couple of specific questions that I didn't address specifically because they're specific. And so since we have the moment, these came in before the session. Do you have recommended language for asking someone to help talk you down from a panic attack? So one of the things that words are very powerful. And one of the things that we do when people come to us and they're having a hard time is we want to fix it and we want to make them feel better. And often that is the opposite of helpful. So some things to say are first and foremost, just to I see you, we name it, yes, I see you. I see that you're scared. I see whatever it is that you can name and help to identify and validate for the person. If they are able to hear breathe, if you can help them hear breathe, it really does lower that cortisol level and can really be incredibly helpful. It's important not to say relax. I don't know if it's Daphne who says this to me, but somebody says nobody ever relaxed from being told to relax or calm down.
I don't think I've said it, but I'm keeping it.
Okay. Or calm down, right? Telling somebody how to behave in the moment where they're terrified and vulnerable, it doesn't help. But really holding space for them to have their moment, and if you can help them breathe. And these practices, in my experience, and I've had friends call me in panic, really, and my kids, right, really work. are your 2 feet on the ground? Can you pay, helping somebody refocus their attention? Like, can you feel your feet on the ground? And to breathe with them, I often find really helpful. Like, let's just take one breath together. And I want to be very transparent. Sometimes people can't, right? They literally can't get to one breath. My son is like this often. And so then it's just about holding space. I'm here. I'm on the other end of the phone. I'm here. I see that you're freaking out and it's okay. And I'm here. And that can be very powerful for people too. Um, if they're in your space, if this is someone you're quarantining with and you can, and they're willing, that physical touch can be very powerful. You need to ask permission. But, for my children, particularly, they need to be like pressed on, and that helps them. But if you're not, also offering somebody that, like, when this can be lovely, and also the pressure on your chest can really, it all impacts your neuropsych system and your nervous system. So I hope that's helpful. Specific practices when we start feeling the energy inside us rising. I mean, and fear, it's the same thing. Refocusing on your 5 senses, right? Like, okay, feel it rising, like feet on the ground. What color's my sweater? Like any 5 senses thing that can redirect your brain. And also that single breath, not sitting down to meditate for 20 minutes. If that works for you, awesome. But those single breaths can change everything. And as we grow the practice, they become 2 and 3. And, also physically, I also really recommend the shaking thing. It's a real thing. Again, this is all science. Shaking out your body, right? Jumping up and down, like shifts some of that like crazy energy that's coming up in your system. Somebody shared that they are living alone, dealing with cancer, and these practices around those basic practices and like what you're eating and what you're drinking, and having some breath practice and space to just like really be in a lot of nourishing yourself, do have physical impact. I mean, I certainly would never, ever intend to speak about cancer treatment or medical treatment of any kind, but there's an enormous amount of research on how self-care practices and just breath practice and keeping yourself grounded can impact our physical health and well-being. And yes, women, again, I just want to close with also honoring that women are not conditioned to do this for themselves, culturally, and often in terms of Jewish, depending on what kind of Jewish messaging you were raised with, it can be very countercultural. And so if there's anything that I can do today to give you the permission that this is actually a mandate of Jewish tradition, and how we become our best selves to be of service to others and to the world, I hope that can be helpful. I wish everybody gvura, strength and breath as we go through this incredibly difficult time. And if there's any way that I can be supportive or helpful, please reach out to me. You have my email address, Facebook, whatever. And just to also let you know about professionally, what I'm offering or what I'm doing at the moment is I am the inaugural national director of Talmud Stand Up, which is an organization providing support around safe, respectful workplaces. So if you are working at this time, just know that there's a resource out there to help with remote work culture and having the most safe, respectful culture we can in the virtual workplace. You can just talmud.org. You can look us up. We are launching a call line for people who have experienced not respectful behavior in the Jewish workplace. We also have trainings and webinars, and we're here to support you in that way too.
Wow, Nicole, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think I speak for everybody who has spent the last hour with us, that I know that I came away with some important tools, and I know that you and I talk about this all the time. So I'm really grateful that you're able to share your wisdom and your insights with our attendees today, and for people who will be watching this after the fact. So to everybody, stay healthy, be well, and we'll see you another time.
Thank you.
Thank you.